Welcome to Uncommon Ground, Speaking Over Shouting. I am Andrew Durand,
I'm Elijah Wharton.
And I'm Jason Moline.
and today we're going to be talking about campaigning since we're coming up on the 2020 election, and that's going to be, I'm sure, just a uh, wonderfully civil discourse between two highly intelligent communicating individuals.
Oh, absolutely.
100%.
100%. Very,
Uh,
very, yeah.
my interest with campaigning actually usually revolves around how politicians speak. And I think one of the interesting things to think about and talk about is the fact that politicians are very careful not to say actual things.
Like policy.
Well, like anything. The whole
Uh,
point of a politician is that you have to be able to say something and have it be so vague and mean so much nothing that everybody can agree with it. And I would here cite every single slogan for every single political campaign ever.
ever.
Yeah, like let's take the two big ones. We have change, which was Obama's campaign.
Nothing.
Nothing. That doesn't mean anything.
Change.
It just change. Like that's it. It doesn't actually mean anything. It's just change. And the reason it works though is because it means different things to different people. So you interpret that the way you want to interpret it, and then you have an opinion. But you don't really have an opinion because nobody's actually said anything. You can't have an opinion on it because you haven't agreed on the terms that are being discussed. So then we move on to this next really let's the Make America Great Again.
What's
What does
great?
that actually mean? And the answer is it doesn't actually mean anything. It's the same as change. It's just got more words. It's still vague, overarching nonsense that doesn't actually mean anything.
I think that there are a lot of people that tie the Make America Great and Make America Great Again. Oh wait, Keep America Great and Make America Great Again. Those campaigns to the idealized version of the '60s,
Or the
like
50s even, yeah.
'50s and '60s.
I
What
would
was
say
caught in
50s.
film?
I don't.
Because what was caught in film was very different from what was actually happening in the world.
And
Like as in
I think that's a
the
big part of
Hollywood scene.
I feel like that's a big part uh of politics in general is and I it's the reason I think that um or it is the reason that the Republican Party is known as conservatives is because they want to maintain a specific, basically maintain what they have. And so they the goal of the conservatives was to uh, basically keep and it started. I think the term conservative started in '50s. Someone can help me with that. I
That
don't know,
that sounds right. Let me double check.
but it's basically to maintain the laws that are in place now. And as they've been, the goal was to, yeah, to keep them in place. And so, uh, I think that's why the Trump campaign chose that type of slogan and why it rings so well to those voters in general, because it's make America great again, as if America is no longer great, looking back to the past and trying to bring that back. It's sort of have you seen I think Andy's seen this. There's a scene in or an episode of South Park with the member berries. It's like, remember when this and it's basically like reminiscing on the past and only focusing on the good things. And I think millennials would get this more. Millennials and Gen Zers. It's like us looking back on 2016 on how great we remember 2016 being, when in reality it's probably just as shit as it is now, except no pandemic. But you know,
Oh, so conservatism is
is the
actually much older. Um, conservative. The term first appears in 1818 in France during the French Revolution.
okay, but
So in
American
America,
conservatism.
well, it's been around since the colonies,
Hmm,
by the
interesting.
look of it. it looks like it's the history of it is actually quite extensive.
Hmm.
So,
But the concept is still the same.
I mean, the concept has always been the same. Conservatism as a concept has always basically said there's a structure in place,
We
and
like it.
there's a structure in place. It seems to be working, not perfectly, but it's working, and we should be very cautious of anything that seeks to destroy or alter that structure.
I'm curious what happened to conservationism, like within the Republican Party, because I know that I learned about this growing up in California that John Muir, back in the I think it was late 1800s, was he went around and sort of like pushed the idea of conserving national parks. National parks weren't a thing, but he was instrumental in their creation by Theodore Roosevelt. And I'm just wondering what happened to that. Why is economic or not economic ecological conservation now a left wing idea?
I think that has to do with, at least to my understanding, it has to do with how uh, the ideals of voters change. And so what happens is when, say, a family has a child, it is guaranteed that that child's ideals will be more progressive than their parents. And so these ideas of conserving national parks were older. I don't know how old were you saying? Like what year?
1880s, I believe.
1880s. Yeah, but then you have to think soon after gas became a big thing and cars. And so when we developed that science, that progression led those people to believe that, okay, maybe we don't need these national parks because we need this oil and we need gas. And so it advances their thought to that. And then now global warming is a big issue. So all of a sudden, all these more progressive voters now want more conservation. And so I feel like it's a shift in terms of time and in terms of it's like a generational change more so than like oh, just give the idea to the other party because we don't like it anymore.
I think ultimately it has to do more with what the priorities end up being. My perception of the situation is that the Republican Party prioritizes economic advancement and technological advancement over environmental protections, and like the left wing is the opposite. And you need both of them actually, because you do need to advance technologically and you need to advance business and industry, but you also need to make sure that while you're doing it, you don't destroy the only tiny little blue water ball that we own. So both of them are necessary in their own way, because the other really interesting thing about the environment is that you have this you have what is called a circle of concern and a circle of influence. This is laid out by Stephen Covey in his 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and he lays out this idea that you as an individual have a long list of things that you are concerned about, and you also have a list of things that you can directly affect. And the concept that he lays out is that you focus on those things that you can control, and you leave the circle, like your circle of concern is larger than your circle of influence, by the way. And if it's not, then there's a problem with you personally, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you work on what you can control, and then your circle of influence gradually expands. The problem is when that starts happening, your circle of concern also ends up expanding, because the more you figure out about the world and the more things you can figure out how to fix, the more things continue to pop up. So this really interesting thing happens when you raise people out of poverty. After you get above some amount of money per year is when you start caring about the environment statistically. So it's not a bad idea to advance industry to the point where everybody is out of poverty. Because once you're out of poverty, then your circle of concern is no longer on like I have to make sure my family is fed.
That has to do, yeah, and that has to do
But
with the
Maslow's
hierarchy
hierarchy
of
is
needs. Yeah,
Maslow's hierarchy is the obvious go-to example. Like if you have to drive a gas guzzling, environment destroying vehicle to get to work to feed your family every day, you don't care about the environment
You
because
care
your
about feeding
direct
your family.
family is vastly more important. But if you can raise everybody's economic status, then people start to become aware of the environment and then they start to change their behavior. I mean, it's not like blanket statement across the board, but like that's an actual effect.
Yeah.
Like that happens.
It's like, for example, you don't see people in the Mad Max Fury Road universe
Yeah.
caring about the environment
Yeah.
because it's not within their sphere of influence or sphere
Exactly.
of concern,
So,
or at all their sphere of influence.
so back to campaigning, and this is something that I've been actually thinking about, is because we were talking about slogans. Do you think there's a way, and this is like going like directly back, like full circle to the beginning. Do you think there's a way to make a message that isn't broad but is still effective in terms of a slogan, or do you think that broad
No.
slogans are just the
No,
way
there's
to
no
go?
way. Because as soon as you become specific, you start excluding. And
Okay.
politicians can't afford to do that.
Remember Hillary's deplorables moment.
I
She called I think she called conservatives a basket of deplorables. Was that what happened there?
I think it was specifically Trump supporters
Yeah. Trump supporters are a
in
basket of deplorables.
2016.
Yeah. I mean, no one was surprised by that though. Both sides are usually vehemently against each other. Every 4 years, everybody's at each other's throats, and then we calm down and kind of usually we just ignore the president for 4 years.
usually,
Yeah.
but not when he's
That's what's actually interesting about the Trump campaign. Trump to me has always been interesting in that I believe I've said this before. He didn't change the game. He just changed the nature of how it was played. Trump, more than any other politician, has come closer to saying something than any other politician I've ever heard speak.
Oh,
he comes so close, but he doesn't.
Well, no,
he's very aware of what he does, but he comes incredibly close to saying something and then just doesn't quite say something. And then the other thing that happens is when he speaks, he does the things that all politicians fear, which is bizarre. When Trump talks, he is incredibly like people talk about what he said. People argue about what he says. People disagree with what he says. And politicians typically don't want that. Politicians want to say something that's so blanket statement and so useless that everyone just goes, yeah, that feels good. Yeah, just moving right along. But Trump doesn't do that. And he won using that method.
So, and here's a question that I'm going to shoot off of that. Do you think that, and this is like, I'm just going to pick two ends of the spectrum. You don't have to land directly on one side. You can land somewhere in the middle. Do you think that Trump is a political genius, or do you think he's just reckless and it's just working to his benefit?
I think his personality works to the benefit of his political career. I don't want to call it a career, but I guess it's a career. I don't know.
I think he's much smarter than anyone on the left gives him credit for. And I think that that's partially why he won in 2016 is because everybody underestimated him.
Well, it really depends on which type, or it depends on the measurement of intelligence. Like some aspects he's just completely brain dead and stupid on, but other ones he's done, like he was a he was like a shady businessman. He knows how to do this stuff. And when it comes to certain things that require that, like, require that mindset, he can actually do that stuff.
Let's this is interesting though. I do kind of like the topic of whether or not Trump is actually aware of how of what he's doing. That's interesting to me. I think that he is. And I think this is why. I think that he looked at the 2016 election, and I think he chose his timing very carefully. I think he looked at it and said, this is going to be a divisive election anyway. This is a good time to try. And then he looked at everything that he's done in the past and said, there's no way I'm going to make it playing by the rules of the other politicians. He understood that he had to change the rules of the game if he was going to win. So he did, and it worked.
Yeah,
I think part of the
people just
reason
let him work because of how broken everything was already.
Well,
Yeah.
because he also came closer to saying something than any other politician, and people fell for it.
Oh,
Because it's so close. It's incredible how close he comes and then says nothing. It's ludicrous. Like other politicians, you can usually find the mark of like, all right, he didn't actually say anything. Trump is like, you got like right there, and then you just kind of.
yeah, real quick, I don't know if this is specifically on like part of his campaigning, but the fact that he actually outright said that we're getting troops out of Syria, but we have to keep some there for the oil. Like, I can't think of another politician that just blatantly told the truth about that. Because
and I think that's
fucked up
part
truth, but
I think
it's the
that's
truth.
part of the appeal of Trump to voters is that he he's not afraid to say what other politicians are, and a lot of the times he could give two shits less if it's like a tough truth or not. And I think that's why people like him, because they think that they can trust him a little bit more than a regular politician. But I mean I'm not a Trump supporter, so I'm not
Well,
absolutely
it's
sure.
actually it's interesting that you bring that up because I will tell people my logistics for voting for Trump in the 2016 election were as follows. I looked at both candidates and I said there I fall on the right wing of the political spectrum, so theoretically on policy I agree with more of his side. I didn't think he was going to do as much as he did because he was more middle ground on policy than I thought he was going to be. And then he actually went a little more right on policy than I thought he would, which is odd. But I looked at both candidates and this was my logic. I said, I've lived in New York my whole life. I know that Hillary is a scumbag and I don't know what she's going to do next. I'm just not going to know. Like if she decides to do something wild and crazy, I'm not going to be aware of it until it's too late. If Trump does something stupid, he's going to say it on Twitter before it happens.
Absolutely.
So I would rather know if something terrible is about to happen. And that was just my logic.
Yeah.
I would rather have a rhinoceros coming at me than a snake in the grass. There's like,
I'm
that was
assuming
the
you paid
2016
more
election.
attention in his 2016 campaign. Did
I
he
did.
ever bring
A
up
little bit.
Did he ever bring up the fact that Hillary advocated for a border wall earlier in her career?
No,
I think he did
no,
actually.
I don't
I think he
remember
touched
that.
on it at
But
some point. That sounds
Well,
vaguely
I'm asking
familiar.
Andy
I don't
this
really
because he would be
remember.
the most
Yeah.
the most familiar.
I don't know if he touched on it or if other people surrounding the 2016 election touched on it. But I do remember it being brought up that there was a point in time where I will tell you because I haven't heard this pitch in a long time, so I don't know how true or not true this is. But it sounds like it makes sense to me. I'll put it like that. There was a time when Democrats were also against illegal immigration.
That
They were
I was
also
about to say
for,
that was all
yeah.
because of Clinton. Bill
Yeah.
Clinton is what started that.
So,
Started that thing.
and then what happened, this is what I think happened. I think that the number of illegal immigrants jumped up. And I think that the Democratic Party hopped on that bandwagon first because they were like untaken base of voters. And then because they do that, then the right side of the political spectrum, because of how the game is played, has to counter that. They have to be like, no, you can't do that because you're just going to get a bunch of voters that are going to put you in office.
What I
So
what I don't understand is why the Democratic Party continues to try and, well, I guess when it comes to grabbing or trying to get the attention and votes of moderate conservatives within this election, um, I would just, because I think in a way it's important for this election for America to reject Trump's just outright statements about, like, outright disrespect about certain things. To to sort of just get rid of that, just say no to it, vote it out. Um, but apart from that, as a reason, the Democratic Party's concern should not be grabbing more people for their base because they have a large enough base. If they can get turnout, they win. So
I think that's true to an extent, and I think it's more so where the turnout is, and that's due to the Electoral College, which I think is a a huge part of campaigning, and I think that even without the Electoral College, we would suffer from a similar issue in terms of what it does to campaigning. And here's my take on that. So with the Electoral College right now, we're seeing people campaign in battleground states. So North Carolina, Arizona, Wisconsin. I'm trying to think off the top of my head. Michigan, places where the margin in 2016 was very, very close. And so right now, Trump is campaigning in those places to try and maintain those voters, and Biden and the Biden campaign are playing ads, campaigning in those areas to try and get voters and get turnout going. And so I forget. I think it's. I want to say it was. I don't know. But so the issue with that is they're not campaigning in the rest of the country. It's always these handful of battleground states where it's like it, they're getting the most bang for their buck in terms of what they're spending for their campaign. And so all these other places across the nation are being left out. But if we were, and this is uh I'm I'm not I'm
I
I don't know
think
where
I'll be
I
able
don't
to
know.
disprove
Yeah.
what you were going to say.
Okay.
If
I
you're
don't.
mentioning cities,
Yeah. I was thinking more so. So I'm still not sure where I stand on eliminating electoral college. But if we were to eliminate the electoral college, campaigning would be would suffer from a similar problem, where they would ad dollars would be spent in a handful of places. There'd be different places than they are now, but the results would be similar.
in a way, that's partially right. But from the research I've done regarding how much campaigning would actually be skewed towards cities, um, the cities, the top 100 cities, they're like, I believe they're under 20% of the votes that would be needed.
Well,
So
I mean, if
campaigning in cities is would not be a win in just cities would not be a winning strategy.
well, it would be more so channeled towards suburbs because suburbs right now are home to I guess the most rapidly changing group of voters right now. So suburban voters have typically been older white voters, but as the suburbs are diversifying, they're moving more from the right and making their way to the left. So the diversifying suburbs is leading to a more progressive suburbs. And so if they can influence this change more and more, then they would get more bang for their buck. And I think it would cause a split in where the two groups advertise or campaign, because I think Republicans would campaign in they would campaign in places that are typically seen as Democratic or leaning Democrat. So
So you're saying Republicans would campaign in Democratic areas rather than Republican
Well,
areas?
I think they would try to grow their base in terms of like advertising, not as much as like rallies and stuff. But in terms of advertising, I think that they would push more of their funding towards these typically Democrat areas or these typically liberal areas to try and get the voters they can from there. And this, keep in mind, this is without if the Electoral College was not in place. But yeah, they're trying to get voters where they can, because now instead of securing like half the votes in a state to get the Electoral College or whatever, I think it's half of the majority. Instead of getting that to just secure the X amount of electoral votes, now you have to get individual votes, and that's a completely different ballgame. Because right now the Electoral College gives Republicans like a 4-point handicap.
Right now, we are very close to the possibility of the Electoral College becoming irrelevant due to the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact,
What is that?
which I can check the amount of states that have signed on so far. But if the amount of states that have signed on, if the amount of votes within those states is if they
If they beat
that
the
group
270,
if that group of states would control over 270, the compact would be initiated, and then all those states would vote for the most popular candidate,
Yeah.
regardless,
I've seen that a little bit.
which is
they all
constitutionally
hold
legal.
all of their votes, and then they wait until somebody achieves the popular majority, and then they all agree to give all of their electoral votes to whoever got the popular majority.
Yeah,
I didn't
and
know that was a
I
thing.
think they
is a thing.
need
Educational podcast.
like 10 or 20 more electoral. They're very close.
What is it called? Say it again. I forget the name
National
all the time.
Popular Vote Interstate Compact.
But that's interesting, because I've wondered how you could handle how the Electoral College would be handled if in terms of trying to eliminate it or it being nullified or whatever, and I didn't know that was a thing. So
That's the only way it would be nullified.
well, it would just it would still technically be in place, yeah, because the other
Yeah.
It would still be in place.
It would still exist, yes.
it would just the handful of states or would have to they would just hold their votes until.
But based on Supreme Court precedent, the Supreme Court has upheld that the states themselves can pretty much decide exactly what their voters are doing. Because there was an elector or a few electors, I believe, in Oregon or Washington, that I think it was Washington, that separated from what they were supposed to vote for as determined by their state, and the Supreme Court determined that they cannot do that, and that the state has full control.
There are 16 states currently signed on.
What states? What's the total at? I imagine California is on there.
Mm-hmm.
And California is like 54 electoral votes.
No.
California's not on there?
No.
They're not.
Can you read off?
I would be surprised.
Can you read off the states?
In 2007, it was introduced in 42 states. It was passed in at least one of the legislative chambers in Arkansas, California, Colorado, Illinois, New Jersey, North Carolina, Maryland, Hawaii.
Oh, so it's okay. It's in Maryland.
The right chart. Jurisdictions enacting law to join the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. There are 16 with a total of 196 electoral votes.
196.
Okay.
So
they're
not as close as I thought.
They're at 196. They just need 80 something more.
They have 72%.
Which is
that's
actually kind of substantial for something this out.
Well, I wouldn't say outlandish, but yeah.
It's not outlandish, but outlandish in terms of like actual policy that's being enacted.
Yeah, it's pretty significant that this is, and is Now, I'm curious. Is this like done at like a referendum where the voters cast their ballots on this, or is this something that state legislators decide on?
This would be, they would just hold their votes. They
Well,
have the,
I mean, not if it were enacted, but is this something that the voters themselves are voting on in terms of policy?
I, th- I think that may be the case in a few of the states, but for example, Delaware, like where you, I guess none of us are in Delaware anymore,
I
or
am in
neither of
Delaware.
us.
I
You
am in
are.
Delaware.
Oh, you are. Okay.
I live right on
Um,
the state line, so
I forget. I always forget that Colton's on the Maryland
I
side,
just
right?
narrowed myself down to a little
Oh, there we go.
a
Well,
radius.
California is on this list. I'm an idiot. Yeah, I can rattle off the 16 states if you want me to, by
Go
the way.
for it.
I gotta remember. It's Maryland, New Jersey, Illinois, Hawaii, Washington, Massachusetts, D.C., Vermont, California, Rhode Island, New York, Connecticut, Colorado, Delaware, New Mexico, and Oregon.
I always forget. So DC doesn't have statehood, but they still get electoral votes.
They do get
And
electoral
that's
votes.
Yep.
Same as Delaware.
Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, Delaware's a state.
Yeah.
I mean, my natural instinct is to
Say Delaware is not a state.
I agree
Yes.
with that.
Forget Delaware.
Delaware isn't
Yeah.
real.
The first state.
Delaware
Number
is a
one.
lie, just like the moon landing. Also, the world is flat. There is no Queen of England. Yeah, no, my instinct on this was to something like I dislike it. The National Popular Vote Interstate Compact.
Why is that?
Because I don't we don't run a popular vote for a reason. It's because it is a bad idea to have a series of small high density locations dictating law for the rest of the country.
But that wouldn't be the case because of the distribution of the United States. Like the reason, like it, back when it was originally enacted, it made sense because people just couldn't communicate. Like you're voting for a politician that you maybe heard about once or something like that, and there wasn't a lot of information around about how people were voting based on policy and ideals. And so it seemed better at the time for electors to go and vote on the behalf of parts of their state. But the reason I don't think that works anymore is, and the reason I think it's actually kind of divisive, is because if you look at states, you kind of look at electoral maps nowadays and be like judging all the people within that state by that electoral map. Do you see a red state? It's like, oh,
It's like, well,
like
everyone
as a,
there,
as
everyone
a
there's
Democrat, it's like, oh, everyone there
yeah,
is just
everyone in Texas
off
is
the
a Trump
rocker.
supporter. Like it's like saying that because Texas voted red in 2016.
Yeah, and
Texas is a huge state with tons of cities, growing suburbs, and tons of Democratic voters. I mean, Beto O'Rourke almost took Ted Cruz's Senate seat in
I think part of the
2018.
reason I'm leery of it is because I think that for the most part it is functioning as intended. I don't think it's a perfect solution, but I think it's functioning relatively as intended. And I think I am in this is actually probably why I'm conservative. I think we mess with that structure at our own peril.
but I think we're already in peril right now within the election system for president. That's sort of where the position comes from, where that change could be a very good net positive. Because if I, for example, lived in, say, Texas, I would, if I did live in Texas, I would choose a rural area because surprisingly, I actually prefer rural areas for living rather than cities as a far leftist. I guess. But
I
living in that
think
area, just
this
being
is
able to vote properly.
an important thing that we're getting to, and I will talk of this more after our break. Uh, I think that it's important to try and because this is a discussion I think people have had in the past and are probably going to have again on choosing majority vote over electoral vote, and we can touch on that more after the break. But right now we're going to go on a break, and we'll catch you guys back. Welcome back. Thanks for staying with us after the break. So we're going to tackle something that I've seen arguments about, even on on Twitter and even in person. I've had conversations about this, whether or not the Electoral College makes sense in American politics, and then what, why it's in place, and basically differing perspectives on whether or not the Electoral College is a good thing. And I I'd like to hear what you guys think, and I think particularly Andy, because you started mentioning it earlier. I'd like to hear where you're at, because like I said earlier, I'm not completely decided on whether or not that I want or I would agree with getting rid of the Electoral College, and I think hearing from both sides would be beneficial to me. So
Well, I haven't done tons and tons of research on it, so I am open to shifting my position and changing my mind. But the things about it that kind of, there's two things about it that bother me. One is that I believe that popular vote works, kind of. It's technically just, that would be a direct democracy, right? That's the one. It's direct democracy. It would just be mob rule, technically speaking.
Direct voting for president.
Yeah.
U.S. is not a direct democracy.
Yeah, no, we're not. But when that's your mindset, then you can have a majority of the population oppress the minority of the population, and I think that's very dangerous. And I think we should be very careful about that sort of thing, because it also starts. I feel like that can start out very small and get out of control very quickly if you're not careful. The other thing that bothers me, particularly about this, this this national popular vote interstate compact,
okay,
is that if something like this were to happen, and we as a country decided that we needed to change something with the Electoral College, and it's not clear to me that we do,
It would require an amendment. So
it would
that's why
require a
the
constitutional
compact.
amendment. And if this is something that should be done, this is the wrong way to do it. We should not circumvent the system that is in place to try and make a change on this scale.
But it does fall within the system that is in place. It is just.
I
It
mean,
would be
it does fall within the system that's in place, but it's also, I mean, it does, but it's also sketchy in an underhanded way of like getting around it. I would prefer, like, if something like this were to happen, ideally it would happen as an actual constitutional amendment that everybody agreed on. This is not that. And I find it concerning that this is how this is an attempt to circumvent the law using the law. I used the laws to destroy the laws. That's what this
okay.
is.
I guess here's the question I have. So governors of each state are elected by popular vote. Why shouldn't the president be elected by popular vote? If we trust the system the way it works for governors and state officials, why shouldn't we trust the same system for electing a national representative?
Because most United States are the size of small European countries.
I think you saying that, I feel kind of supports my thought there, is that if we expect, if the system works for these country-sized states, then why can't it work for our country-sized country?
And we do have a large country, very much so, but there are larger ones, substantially larger ones.
Well, let me go back. This is the reason I feel like stating that it's important to note that states are quite large is because popular vote in an area, let's use New York as an example. Like, we use popular vote to elect everybody. I'm not happy about that, actually, for starters, because my perception of New York is that the entirety of upstate is sacrificed in every way for the benefits of downstate.
You are correct.
And it's
From
it's
all
quite,
I've learned living
so
here.
this is also why I'm so not vehemently, but I'm extremely cautious of this, because I am currently living in a place without an electoral college deciding that every once in a while upstate gets something. And it's a problem. Like, upstate New York is dying. It's really bad. Like, this is not good, and it's not working well here. Why would it work on a grand scale?
Downstate is also dying right now. You do have to keep that in mind. The entire state is dying. I think upstate will bounce back better than downstate, personally.
So do you guys think that, and you guys know New York a lot better than me. I've been to New York. I could count the times I've been to New York on my hands. So do you think that with a system based on popular vote, that all the attention is being placed in, like, New York City specifically, and I guess Albany and Buffalo are the other two cities I could think of in New York?
Rochester as well. Rochester, Syracuse.
Yeah. I mean, I think it was interesting when we were talking about campaigning. I think it's interesting that I don't think there's a way around people campaigning in specific areas.
Well,
like,
yeah,
that's going to happen regardless of what system you use. I don't think altering or removing the electoral college would change that with any actual like
effectiveness.
Yeah, nothing would change there. But I think it is worth noting that, like, you can kind of, it doesn't start, I don't think it starts out bad, because I don't think New York being, popular, electing governors and having everything start to shift over to the city, I don't think that started out that bad. But this is kind of how the federal government functions. Things start out not bad and then they get worse. Like, income tax as a concept was only passed because it was so minuscule that it didn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
Now the government takes 20% of your paycheck. Think about that. Every $100 you make, the government takes 20%.
And then they spend half of that on
defense budget.
Well, we can talk about military later.
Yeah.
I like our military. I don't like how it is right now, but there are good people within it.
I don't like overfunding that, but that like you said, that's a topic for
yeah.
So this is what I know about the Electoral College. This is from a combination of what I remember from my history class that I took like 2 or 3 semesters ago, and on top of a little bit of research that I did over break. And so basically it's my perspective on it is its relation to slavery, because I think that that's an important reason in its implementation. And so basically, when the Electoral College was kind of decided to be the way that the vote is cast for president, it started with a sort of cry for the South to have power, and that was linked to kind of the 3/5 compromise. So after the 3/5 compromise was decided on, Southern states had a little bit more power, and so in a try to get more power, states, mostly Virginia, which is back then was very comparable to California now, having a lot of electoral votes, specifically 12 out of the 91. Basically, they had what was it? I'm trying to think of the percentage in my head. 12 out of the 46 that they needed. So it was a little over a quarter of the votes needed to vote for a president were from Virginia. So if you had Virginia, you had control. You had a huge money pot in terms of electoral map control. And so the Electoral College basically helped slavery stay enacted and helped slavery and pro-slave legislators, or not legislators, but presidents become elected. And it was used to push the agenda. But as more states came on, Virginia lost power. As more states came on, the Electoral College kind of spread out, which I think it worked better. It works better on a larger map than it did on the smaller one.
I think
Because you
the
can
peak
have
of the Electoral College was definitely in those middle
Yeah,
years of its
yeah.
life.
I think it was a lot easier to abuse back then, but now I think it doesn't fully represent the ideas of the country itself. I think it gives I think of it like a dartboard. You take a policy, you throw a dart at the US, and it's like, okay, or throw like 3 darts into the US, it's like, okay, these 3 groups agree with that policy, or these 3 areas agree with that policy, and whatever. But it's like you just assume that since the majority of these states from different areas agree with a certain or agree with a politician, that it would be represented the whole country. And that's why I'm still stuck between them, because even the other way around, without the Electoral College, you run into the same issue. And so it's about finding a system or tuning the system so it is a better representative or better representation of the country as a whole, and isn't focused on just specific areas.
I think
So
any problems that would possibly arise from the Electoral College not being relevant would would not necessarily be a fault of that change. I think it would be a fault of the two-party system. Because if you have, like, for example, someone in the city is not necessarily going to want to vote the same way as someone in the suburb, which is not going to want to vote the same way as someone who manages a tree farm. Like,
okay.
there are more than 2 groups of people. And I think polarizing everything into, oh, these states are bad because they're against my views, these states are good, based on a map, and also just based on how someone, like, actually behaves.
Florida.
Yeah,
Florida man
but
does this. Are you gonna judge the entire state based on the Florida man who shoved meth up his ass? No, you're not.
Florida's a special
Good.
case. But yeah, I think having more parties, more voices, or at least more voices within parties. Like right now, there is a growing progressive voice within the Democratic Party, and progressive candidates are challenging centrist candidates, and in those cases, it's like it's sort of doing itself, but it's all within a two-party system. And I think there are just limitations to the two-party system, and having the ability for everyone to vote would allow people to just be like, oh, I don't have to, like, because right now it would be practically impossible to create a functioning third party.
I
But
think that's a good spot to transition, because I know, Andy, you've told me that you were at least thinking about voting for what is it,
Joe Jorgensen.
Joe Jorgensen at
Yeah.
the Libertarian
Yeah.
Party. And so I've heard quite a few people mention her, and so it's like, I guess I'll ask you this question, because I think it's important for I think it's an important ideal of our nation, or an important thing to note, that our nation wasn't built with the idea that we would be strictly a two-party system. And so do you think that A, there's a possibility of getting a third party in and being notable or at least competitive, and B, even if you don't believe that they can be competitive, what do you think the value is of voting for a third party candidate?
So there's a couple of interesting things here. First of all, I think that people have the concept of change directly backwards. Everybody, like, there's this really bizarre, and I don't quite understand why this is, but when people want change, when they want something to shift, they go and talk to the federal government about it. And that is so backwards to me that I can't quite wrap my head around it. No politician is going to shift until they absolutely know that they have the majority of people on their side for that specific topic.
Unless that politician comes from that movement.
Like
yeah, and
Bernie
but
Sanders.
that's also, yeah, and then most of the time that's just political suicide, because
Yeah.
people just don't reelect you. So historically speaking, it's just, you just don't do it. So like this idea that starting change from the top and going down is somewhat ludicrous to me, because politicians don't change based on what people tell them. They change based on how they get to keep their jobs, which is from the bottom up, not the top down. They're not gonna, they change last. Politics changes the last. Like they don't move until like at least a majority is on board with an idea. They won't. So going from the top down has always been kind of bizarre to me in that respect. So changing things based on that is kind of weird.
I'm thinking it's more of a centrist thing to expect the government to do more than it should.
I think it's
Yes.
I think it's centrist and leftist. I think those are the directions it is.
There are some on the left that do that.
I just want the government to leave me alone. I want them to go away. I want them to stop taking my money.
I think it's funny you guys mentioned that, because that's exactly where I am on the spectrum, and that's exactly what I believe. Is that I'm just like, I think it's our job to voice our concerns, and it's the government's job
This is
to
actually
change.
the value of third-party candidates. Is third-party candidates talk about things and do things that neither party will touch.
And then there's Andrew Yang, who just
So, but the thing is, third-party candidates and the role of the third parties has always been the same. Actually, they will posit an idea. If the idea gains traction, then the third party generates traction. Both of the main parties take notice and adopt pieces of it. The change process is slow, but it is there. This is what I actually want. I would really, really love if we could get a third-party candidate on the debate stage.
I completely agree.
I think that would solve most of the problems that we currently have. If we could get a third-party candidate on the debate stage, I think a lot of these problems would actually start to go away.
But do you think even if a third-party candidate had, say, 10, 15%, I think there's still a potential that Biden and Trump would just be like, we're not debating them.
They're not fighting them for voters, so why should it matter? But
they are, and that's the beauty of it.
Well,
a third-party candidate
can
cut into your base, and they don't need to cut into both sides of the base. They just need to cut into one.
Well,
and so if your party is so skewed in one direction that they are talking crazy nonsense, and a third-party candidate comes in and says, he's talking crazy nonsense, I'm going to do this instead, you're going to undercut, like, maybe even if it's just 10% or 15% of your voters. That's enough. That's enough off of either side to just ruin a candidate. That's exactly, like, that's partially what happened in 2016. Bernie Sanders was effectively a third-party candidate because he had so much popular motion behind him that he undercut the election. This stuff matters.
Necessarily, I think that was more Hillary just being a terrible candidate and everything just falling apart at the last moment.
Because
Hillary, in the primary of 2008, more Hillary voters went to McCain than Bernie voters went to Trump in the 2016 versus 2008 election.
So more McCain voters went to Hillary
No.
And
Hillary was primarying Obama. Obama won the primary. More of Hillary's voters went to McCain than
oh,
voters went to Hillary in 2016. I know it's a little confusing because of Hillary being in both of the things, but does that make sense?
I think part of
Yeah.
I think this loops back to turnout. Part of the issue with 2016 was that the Democrats were so confident they were going to win again because they were coming off of 2 wins back to back for Obama. I think they were so confident that they couldn't. And I mean, given their opponent was Donald Trump, they just assumed that they were going to win.
And all the
And so
polling showed
turnout
that it was
nuked.
going to be a blowout.
Yeah, and
Right?
Mhm.
I mean,
This is something that Jason and I briefly spoke on the break.
in terms of popular vote, it was a blowout. But in terms of the electoral college vote, it was not. And so I think that's why this came up in our discussion is 4 million extra votes went to Hillary than Donald Trump, but she still lost the electoral college.
I think though that Trump would have still won in 2016 with a popular vote because of all the support that he had in like rural areas of Democratic states. Because
No, I mean it's
he had
not
a path.
it's not up to debate. Like Hillary won the popular vote by 4
yes.
million.
No, I'm saying that if that wasn't the ideal, because
If
there's so many people that didn't vote
Oh, you
because of
mean
where
if
they
the
live.
system was set up? Okay, if the system was set up as a popular vote system from the get-go.
Yeah, I think Trump still
I
would have won 2016.
I still don't. I think the electoral college system kind of turns voters off most of the time because if you live in a like, I live in Delaware. Delaware hasn't voted red since Reagan, and so my vote, I know I'm voting blue and I'm gonna vote anyways, but like I don't have a lot of incentive to vote because I already know Delaware is voting blue, especially with Joe Biden, who is from Delaware. Like,
Yes, but I do
my
think
state's
Delaware
guaranteed
is
to vote blue.
becoming a red state slowly.
I don't think so. I think the northern half of Delaware is holding its ground very well, and I really
I'm
think
just saying it's slow because of the influx in the southern part of the state. But this is a lot of local politics stuff.
yeah, the local politics aren't as important.
Well, they are more important,
Well, they're
but
more important,
individually they aren't as important.
I mean in terms of our audience for
Oh
this
yeah, for sure.
podcast, not at all.
So I actually wanted to touch on polling because I posited this theory to Jason during the break, and so in 2016 the polls were just disastrously wrong, as everybody found out, and in I've done a lot of thinking as to why that happened and how that could have happened, and I have this theory, and this is just a theory, and it potentially sounds a little tinfoil hatty, but it makes sense to me.
I'd like to touch on this after you go. Sorry.
That there's that being politically on the left can be there are certain personality traits that are associated with it, right? They're not like absolutes, but there are certain personality traits that make it more likely for you to be on the left wing of the political spectrum, and the same goes for the right. But I think that those traits on the left mean you're more likely to participate in a poll. And I think that's part of what happened.
And you are correct in that part of what happened. Yes, polls do lean left. That is a fact.
It's also worth pointing, and I also pointed this out to Jason during the break. If you go back and watch our first podcast, Eli, when you bring up the fact that I voted for Trump, like I become visibly uncomfortable in my chair. Like I start shifting and moving around.
I was like,
yeah.
Now hold on.
Well, that's a real thing.
Yeah.
Like there's
a hostility out there.
Yeah, there's hostility associated with that. So
Yeah.
that's relevant.
And there's Trump's actions, which are just
okay, and so I think polling. I like to look at polling from a statistical perspective, and I guess that's the math teacher to me. And so, say you take a random group of 100 people, and let's say you're taking that random group of 100 people from New York. Chances are 70% of those voters are probably going to be Democrat. Unless you put a really good 100 people, you're going to get skewed results. And so the idea around polling is to try and predict the national electorate. And if you don't get polling from every single person in the country, you're not going to have an accurate poll. And so accuracy is based on sample size, and sample size is key. And I think that's one of the reasons polls can sometimes like blow your mind is like you look at them and they just give you a percentage and it's like, oh, okay. But how big was the sample size? 100 people, 1,000 people, 20,000 people?
Lying with statistics is
yes,
very, very
yes,
easy.
it's very easy to lie with statistics, and it's statistics have a way of giving false hope, and I think that's what happened in 2016. Is everyone said, "Oh, well, the polls look great. There's no way Hillary loses." So you know what? I don't even need to go out to vote because she's already gonna win.
As an example for falsified statistics or falsified, like 4 out of 5 doctors recommends
Yeah.
blank brand.
Yeah,
it's because they asked the doctors, do you recommend any of these like 10 brands? And if they just say yes to, it's not like if they do ranked choice.
Yeah, they say yes to the list.
And the methodology
like, okay,
behind it matters quite a bit.
And
so does the presentation at the end. These are both aspects that matter a lot.
That's why statisticians and pollsters are so important to like a campaign team, is because it's important to know where you're at, like actually. And I think in politics, it's important to know where you're at in specific areas. And so that's why when I look at polls, I look at state polls more than anything, because state polls are going to be way more accurate than if you look at a national GE poll.
Yeah, real clear election. Politics average polls are very. That's the best source of polling. It does lean left though. Just
I always
about 2 or 3 points.
I always take polls with a grain of salt, because the battle's not won yet. For me, the battle's not won until Trump's out of office, and so it's not done until November 4th. 2 days
for
after.
me, this battle's not won until he's out of office. The battle's not over though. If Biden's in office, for me,
I mean, there's still a battle, but
Biden in office is not necessarily a good thing. It's just a better thing.
I mean, I respect your opinion there. I disagree. I think Biden would do an alright job. But that's a different thing. We'll get
I really hope he properly repairs foreign relations, because that's something Trump is actually the worst at.
It's pretty bad, but all right. Well, this seems like a natural stopping point. I think that we've all gotten a lot out, unless anyone has some last remarks.
I don't think so.
No?
I think everything's pretty good. I'm really interested in how these. I think it's less than 100 days. I guess it's 3 months. 3 months. Wait.
3.
No, 2.
What election is in?
Little over 2.
Yeah, so it's start of September.
7 weeks. 7 weeks. Wait,
so,
no, 9 weeks.
You guys
weeks.
both know who you're voting for?
I know who I'm voting for. I can grab my hat if you wanted me to.
Mostly sure.
I was wearing it right before this.
Unless Biden does some terrible thing. Actually, I don't think Trump could get my vote. Yeah, I'm certain Trump couldn't get my vote. And I'm almost certain Biden has it. Sadly, I hate to say that. It's just Trump has done so many negative things, in my opinion, versus like with international relations, with trying to repair the structure of the divisiveness of the country, or fix the divisiveness. Trump has just ruined that further.
My roommates are voting.
I really wish his
Probably.
infrastructure bill passed, but sadly, that didn't pass because McConnell. Because yeah, I think
Dang.
there's a lot of problems with what we have. I'll just leave it at
I
that.
do not know who I'm voting for yet. It is not going to be Biden. There is zero chance of that.
I understand that.
That's fine.
Yeah, I scrolled through everything that he stood for, and I basically said I am against literally every single one of these things.
I don't even know what he stands for.
It's
And
a lot
I
of.
would have to look at it again, but it's all
Jason,
pretty heavily left.
take a lot of the stuff you believe in and turn it a little towards my direction, and that's it. Actually just put it in my perspective of what you believe about a lot of things, and that's about where I'm at.
I'm thinking
That's
that
where
he
he's
just stands for stuff that doesn't really impact how a lot of major industries are working now.
Although we did point out at the very beginning of this that politicians are very careful not to stand for anything at all. So when
The
you're
Aaron
watching
Burr.
politics, if you're watching politics and you're listening to people talk about it, and you think somebody has said something really important,
Nope.
double check, because they probably haven't.
Well, libertarians on the right definitely stand for something, and progressives on the left stand for something, but I don't know about the core parts of those parties.
No, hold on. All right. I think that's a great place to stop. Even after Jason just insulted me, it's okay.
I'm not insulting you. You stand for you stand for different things.
I stand for similar things, but it's okay. All right. Thank you guys for tuning in. Make sure to hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, and yeah, we'll catch you next week. We don't know what we're talking about yet. We never do, but we'll figure it out.
Yep. All right.
Adios.
Have a good day, y'all.